Make her fail the range at 0500. People like her do not belong in uniform. Right now. My stepfather set it into a tiny speaker in my mother's living room while October rain ticked at the window. I stood in the dark phone recording beside my dog tags and a quiet radio scanner. He called me dead weight. He said logistics doll. He whispered switch the BCG, write her up for Article 92, make it look like she is unsafe. He thought I was asleep. I had been waiting for this line for weeks. The armorer log showed a badge swipe after hours. My range tag came back with a different serial than the one I signed for. A mechanic wrote that my lug nuts had been loosened. I sent a tip to the CID duty desk before I brushed my teeth. Tonight I left my phone on the table with the mic open. Earl leaned closer to his speaker and said it again. Make her fail at 500. We take the weapon from the cage, swap the carrier, let the weapon choke, then say she broke safety. I thought about the Labor Day cookout where he told cousins I would never be trusted with live fire, while my mother smiled and looked away. 3 steps away, I let the recorder collect his voice. Do you have the vendor on board? He said. I heard the name. I heard the training NCO he liked to impress. I heard the word tag. The radio scanner breathed. A car passed with wet tires. You are not reacting, I told myself. You are documenting. He wanted a safety violation. He wanted a counseling statement. He wanted a story where I was careless, and he was the one who tried to help. I was not careless. I am a 92Y in the 101st, and I know a cage by sound and a serial by feel. I know how a clean carrier slides. I know how a dirty one refuses. He lowered his voice and said no one will believe her anyway. That was the part that hurt more than the plan. He trusted the rule that a quiet girl will not be heard. Quiet does not mean weak. Quiet means patient. I opened the banking app and moved the family phone plan into my mother's name. I removed his profile and took a photo of the confirmation screen. Numbers do not yell. They explain. At 0109, he said the order a third time. The mic caught it clean. I pictured the range at dawn, the cold bench, the RSO with a clipboard the moment a weapon coughs, and a gossip chain tries to turn a cough into a crime. I pictured myself raising a hand calling ceasefire, keeping the muzzle down. Procedure is a kind of courage. I set a reminder to meet the RSO before weapons issue for a quick function check. I typed a note with the range safety rule. My mother coughed down the hall. Earl muted his speaker and walked past me without seeing me. When the door closed, I let out the breath I had been holding. I saved the file to the cloud and to a thumb drive I keep in a tin in the freezer. I texted the CID duty number my case number and the words audio captured at 1009 at residence. The reply arrived in less than a minute. Bring what you have in the morning. Preserve any tags. Do not confront. My hands shook anyway, not from fear, from the pull between what I wanted and what I knew. I wanted to walk into the living room and say I heard you. I wanted to ask my mother why my safety is a punchline. Instead, I wrote down times. I wrote down the words he used: dead weight, doll, unsafe. I wrote down the vendor name and the training NCO. I wrote down that a cop on Wilma Rudolph saw a wobble before a wheel came off. I put the paper in a folder labeled receipts and slid it under the cushion of the chair where I lace my boots. When I lay down, I left the light over the sink on. The rain kept time on the window. The scanner breathed. My phone hummed when the backup finished. They say, toxic family is still family. They say, keep the peace. Peace without truth is not peace. It is a script that keeps you small. He said people like her do not belong in uniform. What he does not know is that my unit calls me quiet knife. I belong. CID heard the orders. I survived the night. I am done being quiet. If you have ever heard family betrayal in the next room comment, still here, quietly. Clarksville in Tennessee looks quiet from the outside, a place of red brick houses, trimmed lawns, and grocery carts lined up at the Kroger off Wilma Rudolph Boulevard. But quiet places have long memories and sharper echoes than cities. I was born here, and I serve at Fort Campbell across the Kentucky line, and I used to think coming home would feel safe. After the night I caught Earl whispering into that tiny speaker, every street felt different. Every porch light felt like a witness that finally decided to open its eyes. My name is Mara Bennett. I am 24. I am a unit supply specialist for the 101st Airborne. My job is simple and heavy. I sign for property. I guard serial numbers. I keep gear moving so soldiers can breathe, shoot, sleep, and deploy without waiting for someone who lost a box. Some soldiers joke that supply just hands out paper. The smart ones know that supply is the spine. When a spine cracks, a unit drops. Inside the company area, people call me Quiet Knife. I did not give myself that name. Someone started it after a field problem where I caught a missing NVG line on a hand receipt that could have ended with a commander on the carpet. A whisper travels faster than a shout in the Army. I do not argue. I document. At home, nobody cared what I documented. Clarksville is full of people who worked on post in some form. Cousins who married soldiers, uncles who sold tires to motor pools, neighbors who patched roofs for barracks renovations. Earl fit right in. He worked as a civilian contractor on supply contracts for a few years and learned enough vocabulary to sound official. He told relatives he trained soldiers on accountability. He told others he had been the reason a unit passed inspection. Every time he opened his mouth, the story grew. My mother, Denise, never corrected him. She liked a loud man in the house after years of being alone. She liked bills that were paid on time. She liked the way he could make her forget her own loneliness. What she did not see was how he used her loneliness to make himself look like the hero. I saw it. At Sunday dinner 1 month earlier, I brought a small cake to celebrate a new ribbon a fellow soldier earned at the board. I thought it would be a nice gesture. Earl cut in before I could finish the sentence and said your little office job gave someone a sticker. People laughed, and the cake felt ridiculous in my hands. My mother changed the subject instead of saying, "Stop." I smiled the way quiet people smile when they need to leave the room without shaking. At church one weekend, a woman asked Earl if he was proud of me. He gave a shrug and said she is a paper soldier. She does not do real Army work. With that sentence, he took my uniform and turned it into a costume. A man in the pew behind us coughed into his hymnal to hide a laugh. My mother stared at her purse. A backyard barbecue, same pattern. Plastic chairs, kids with juice boxes, Earl leaning back and saying, "She is a token female." They put her in supply because she can type. That is what happens in toxic families. The room laughs along because no one wants to be the next target. I felt something tighten behind my ribs. I knew I would not yell. Yelling is wasted oxygen. I would pull strings in silence. He never remembered who paid the bills because I paid them without fanfare. He handed my mother a bank card at Christmas and told everyone he covered the phone plan. The truth was that the plan had my name on it, and the card was only a profile under my account. After the church, I went home, opened my laptop, and removed him as subscriber. The system asked for a PIN, and I changed it. I transferred the line into my mother's name only and printed the confirmation. I told my mother the plan was updated and she would save money. I freeze her credit for 60 days to protect her from any mischief if Earl ever tried to open a card in her name. I did not tell him. I did not need to. This was not spite. It was protection. Story financial lessons come dressed as quiet screens and receipts. The next week, I stood in line at a gas station near Wilma Rudolph and watched Earl typing on his phone. He walked outside, and I saw the reflection of the screen in the glass. He was messaging a vendor I recognized. The name made my stomach tighten. It was a vendor who handled storage cages for training NCOs. I only caught a few words before he locked the screen. Tag, range, Monday. The vendor laughed in an emoji and sent a thumbs up. My hands felt like ice. I pumped gas and sent myself an email that said, Earl vendor tag, and added the date. That night, I checked the armorer log on post because I had a bad hunch. There was a badge swipe after duty hours. I knew the timestamp, and I knew Mercer was on night shift. The armorer noted a 5-minute visit. Supply does not visit cages in the dark unless there is a mistake or a favor. There had been no mistake. I saved the log entry. I printed it and slid it between 2 pages of a cookbook in my kitchen. I started to feel like my life lived in 2 lanes. On base, I was respected. I knew how to fix a missing hand receipt. I knew what form saved a soldier from paying for lost gear. I knew which part of a carrier shines when it is polished right, and which part grows dull when someone sands a number. At home, I was invisible, a paper soldier, a token female. It is a strange kind of pain when strangers believe in you more than family. Every time Earl told someone I was nothing, my mother looked away. She said, "Do not take it so personally." She said he did not mean it. Meaning is in the wound, not the excuse. One night after dinner, I saw Earl leave his phone on the couch. The screen was face up for a moment, and I saw a message from Mercer. It was short. Tomorrow night. I took a breath and let the phone ring in the dark. I knew I could not confront them yet. You cannot shatter a lie without proof. You gather it one piece at a time. Quiet knife, they called me. Quiet means I study the cut before I make it. The first cut was financial. The second would be proof of intent. I went to sleep with my boots by the door and my phone recording. My house was still. The rain tapped again at the window. Somewhere in Clarksville, a plan was building and they thought I would never see it. They were wrong. Labor Day arrived with hot grills flags on porches and kids running in circles with plastic water guns in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. The backyard belonged to my aunt's neighbor, a woman who liked hosting soldiers and their families because her son was deployed and she missed the noise. I showed up in jeans and a simple t-shirt, not in uniform because I wanted one afternoon where I could sit, sip iced tea, and breathe like an ordinary 24-year-old. I should have known better. Earl never wasted a crowd. He wanted an audience the way a match wants dry wood. The smell of barbecue hung in the air. People sat in camp chairs and talked about college football and school supply lists. My mother brought a tray of potato salad and tried to look cheerful. Earl walked around with a bottle of mustard like a scepter. When he spotted me near the picnic table, he raised his voice just enough. She will never be trusted with live fire. Supply is just paperwork. Someone snorted into their cup. A teenager recorded a bit of it for social media because humiliation spreads faster than smoke. For a second, I felt my skin turn hot, then cold. My mother stared at the ground. Not one relative spoke up. Earl went on telling a made-up story about how he once had to fix my weapon because I could not clear it. He painted me as a burden in front of strangers and family. That is the first drop on the emotional roller coaster. The moment when gravity pulls you down and your stomach forgets how to stay still. I glanced at my aunt. She pushed her sunglasses higher and pretended to rearrange forks. The pain was not that he lied. The pain was that everyone preferred the lie because it was entertaining. I went to the cooler and pulled a bottle of water unscrewed. The cap took a long drink and reminded myself that noise is temporary but receipts last. I remembered the birthday gift Earl had bragged about weeks earlier. A kitchen mixer he claimed he bought for my mother. He made her cry happy tears. The truth was, on my bank statement, the store had my card, my account, my money. He had even told people he used his employee discount. The lie tasted bitter every time I looked at that mixer on the counter. So the next morning, I drove to the store with the receipt in my glove box. The cashier scanned the barcode and read the name on the original transaction. Mine. I told her I wanted a refund. She asked if the gift had a problem. I said the problem was invisible but real. She did not ask more. She handed me the cash and the receipt. At home, I printed the bank statement, folded it into a plain envelope, and placed it in the kitchen drawer next to the mixer. I did not write a note. Silence is a powerful message in a toxic family. That was mini revenge. A small cut, not enough to make Earl bleed, but enough to let him know I could expose truth whenever I wanted. The humiliation from the cookout did not end when I left. Someone sent me a short clip. I saw myself standing still while Earl talked. I saw heads shaking and shoulders bouncing with laughter. I saved the clip. Evidence is not dramatic. It sits quietly until needed. What nobody expected was that someone else was listening that afternoon. My aunt's friend, a woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a calm voice, stood behind Earl during most of his rant. She wore a simple blouse and jeans. She looked like just another guest. After the food was cleared and children were herded toward minivans, she walked up to me while I packed leftovers. "You are Mara, right?" I nodded. She said my name is Naomi Price. I smiled politely. She said I work as a captain with JAG on post. Your aunt is a friend of mine. She leaned closer and kept her voice low. I heard what he said, and I saw how you handled yourself. No outburst, no scene, just quiet. If anything ever feels wrong at the arms room or on the range, you can call me. She handed me a card with her office number. She did not wink or whisper like she was telling a secret. She spoke like someone who knew that quiet people often carry the heaviest truth. My throat tightened. I thanked her. She squeezed my shoulder and walked away. That was twist 3, a doorway opening in the middle of a dusty path, a bridge that appeared just when I feared I might have to walk alone. That night, my mother went to bed early. Earl stayed up watching television. I stood in the kitchen and placed the envelope with the refund and statement into the drawer. Beside it, I laid the mixer manual with a sticky note showing the model and the original purchase date. The silence of that drawer felt like justice sleeping with one eye open. I brushed my teeth and lay down, but sleep came slow. Every time Earl told a room that I was nothing, a part of me wanted to scream. But something stronger grew in its place. The knowledge that he underestimated the one thing he could never see. My patience. People who live on attention cannot imagine the power of someone who waits. The next day at work, I walked past the supply cages and smelled the familiar scent of oil and dust. Soldiers signed for gear, carried rucks, and joked about weekend plans. The world outside my family still made sense. When I scanned the logbook, I noticed a new line added in careful handwriting. Mercer had signed in late the previous evening. 5 minutes. No explanation. My stomach tightened. The words from the cookout echoed. She will never be trusted with live fire. I kept my face calm and moved on. I locked the page in my folder. When you serve in a place like Fort Campbell, you learn that respect is earned in small, quiet ways. A clean hand receipt, a fast turn in, a soldier finding the right size plate carrier because you remembered his fit from 3 months before. Earl had no idea what real work looked like. He had no idea how deep the roots of integrity run in a place built on discipline. As the week rolled forward, my life split in two. At home, I was the quiet ghost. On post, I was the quiet knife. Someone who did not shout but cut through lies one document at a time. The crowd in Hopkinsville would forget their laughter, but the camera that caught the clip would not. And the card in my wallet from JAG. Captain Naomi Price sat like a promise I had not cashed in yet. The first drop had passed. The fall was not over. The track was still rising beneath me. After the Labor Day cookout, Earl changed his tactics. Mockery in public had not broken me, so he shifted to quiet sabotage at home. He started telling my mother that the phone bill was too high and that I should not be paying it because I was never home. He framed it as concern, but the real goal was control. One evening, I came back from a late shift and found my mother sitting at the kitchen table with a flyer from another phone company. Earl wanted her to switch plans and cut my line altogether. He said I could afford my own. I already paid for my own, but facts never mattered in a toxic family. What mattered was the story he wanted people to believe. The next morning, he posted in the family group chat that I was demanding special treatment and acting like I was better than everyone because I was in the Army. Someone in the group asked if the 101st really took just anyone. Earl replied with a joke about fake airborne, and a cousin replied with a laughing emoji. It was family betrayal in bright colors. My mother saw it and pretended she did not. She folded laundry with stiff hands and said nothing. Silence can be a deeper cut than words. On post the next week, I walked into the supply office and found SSG Kyle Mercer leaning against a wall with 2 younger soldiers. He saw me and smirked. Supply just hands boxes. I kept my voice even. Supply gets you home with the gear you signed for. He waved his hand like he was shooing a fly. The younger soldiers looked away. I walked out without giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. Bullies wait for noise. They hate discipline. That same afternoon, I checked the armorer log again. There was another late badge swipe. Same time window, same short duration. The armorer had initialed it, but there was no reason for anyone to be there at that hour. My skin prickled. I pulled my own weapon card and saw something small but important. The range tag on my assigned weapon had a slightly different sheen than I remembered. Most people would never notice. Tags fade slowly, but this one looked newer, like it had been swapped recently. I took a photo of it and emailed it to myself. I saved the armorer log too. These were breadcrumbs on a long, ugly trail. At home, Earl prepared for Sunday dinner with cousins. He planned to wear a shirt with an army pattern to make himself look like part of the culture. He even told my mother he might show them his old name tape, a patch he bought online to look official. He loved attention more than truth. That Sunday, I texted my mother and said duty changed unexpectedly. I could not make it. Earl had already invited half the neighborhood. He stood in the doorway with his shirt tucked just so, waiting to brag about his connection to Army life. When I did not appear, the spotlight never found him. People came, ate, and left. He tried to bring up the topic himself, but without me there, the interest fizzled. My aunt told me later that he moped around the living room like someone who lost the remote to his own show. It was a small sting, but a personal one. Mini revenge can be just denying a narcissist the audience he counts on. It does not scream. It whispers. It hurts pride. At work, I took my car to a garage in Clarksville because it had started making a strange noise around 60 miles per hour. A mechanic named Troy checked the wheels and asked if I had done any heavy off-road driving. I shook my head. He got quiet, wiped his hands on a rag, and asked me to come over. The lug nuts on the front wheel had been loosened. Not fallen out, loosened. He told me calmly that if I had hit a pothole the wrong way, the wheel could have come off. I felt my stomach drop. I asked if it could have been a mistake. He said, mistakes look random. These were turned just enough to hold, but not enough to be safe. Intent leaves a pattern you cannot ignore. I paid and sat in the waiting area with the receipt in my bag. This was no longer about insults or petty control. This was danger. I walked out to the parking lot, sat in the driver's seat, locked the door, and breathed slowly. 1 breath. 2, 3. Family should protect. Mine was becoming a threat. I sent myself an email titled Garage Confirmation. I attached a photo of the invoice. Then I sent a short text to Captain Naomi Price. Nothing dramatic, just a note that said, I have mechanical proof of tampering. She replied with a time to meet. It felt like a rope finally being thrown into the dark. That night at home, I listened to Earl brag in the kitchen about how real Army men would never trust a supply specialist with anything important. He joked about how I only got into the service because the recruiters were desperate. He made my mother laugh even though she did not want to. When he saw me in the hallway, he smirked. Big day tomorrow. People are coming by, gonna talk shop about the military. He expected me to play the silent daughter and let him wear my uniform through his stories. But I changed plans. I packed a small duffel and told him I would be at a soldiers' support event near Nashville. He scoffed and said those were fake events for people who wanted attention. I left the house while he was still laughing. The next day, he posed in front of guests wearing his shirt with a flag patch and bragging about knowing how the Army really works. Meanwhile, I was sitting with Captain Price in her office, handing her printouts of the armorer logs and the garage report. She read each page slowly. She took notes. She asked clear questions, the kind that cannot be dodged, the kind that make lies shrink. When I stepped back into my car, I knew the world had shifted. Earl was losing his grip, Mercer was running out of shadows, and I was not alone anymore. The rain started before sunset and kept falling in thin silver sheets across the highway that runs from Clarksville toward Oak Grove. I had driven that road 100 times, but that night the tires hummed strangely on the wet asphalt. The steering wheel trembled every few seconds, a small vibration like a warning whispered through metal. I turned off the radio and focused on the lines ahead. The wipers scraped a steady rhythm across the glass. A semi passed me and threw a wave of water over the windshield. When my vision cleared, the car shook harder. My pulse climbed. I slowed to 40 and merged toward the shoulder. The wheel gave a final jerk and the whole chassis shuddered. I imagined the mechanic's calm voice saying that a pothole could have taken the wheel clean off. The smell of hot rubber drifted through the vents. I pulled to a stop under a broken streetlight. Rain tapped on the roof like impatient fingers. A patrol cruiser rolled up behind me after a minute or two, lights flashing soft red and blue against the dark road. The officer tapped on my window. He asked if I was all right. I told him the car felt wrong. He crouched near the front wheel with his flashlight. The beam flickered across the rim. He told me I made the right call. Another half-mile could have been trouble. He offered to call a tow. As I waited, water pooled around my boots when I stepped out. The night smelled like wet earth and diesel. The tow truck driver loaded the car and gave me a lift back toward Clarksville. I stared at the blurred lights, thinking how sabotage does not always come with a shout. Sometimes it arrives quietly like loose metal waiting for the wrong moment. When I got home, my mother was in the kitchen wiping the counter. She looked tired and nervous. I told her what happened. She gasped, but when I said I needed to show someone official, her face shut down. Do not make this a big deal because of family. That sentence fell like a stone in my stomach. She wanted peace, even if the cost was my safety. Gaslight wears a polite mask. She said maybe the mechanic had made a mistake. Maybe I hit a curb. Maybe I was imagining intent. She wanted to hold the old life together. I wanted to stay alive. I told her quietly that I had proof. She looked at the floor and said nothing. Later that night, I opened my social media and saw posts from relatives hinting that I had become dramatic, that I thought the world was against me, that maybe I needed help. Earl was steering the conversation with invisible hands. Toxic families twist stories faster than storms twist branches. I went into my privacy settings and removed him and the family list from everything. I set the account to show posts only to close friends and blocked his ability to tag my name. It was small, but it stopped the spread of rumor for now. Mini revenge can be as quiet as a cursor clicking. Each step took back a tiny piece of me. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my laptop. I typed an email to the CID duty address Captain Price gave me. I wrote plainly, wheel tampering confirmed by mechanic. Armorer logs show late badge swipes. Range tag appears replaced. Added context. I attached the receipts and the photo of the tag. I expected a long wait. I expected silence. Instead, a reply came the next morning from a special agent. Bring what you have. Case number attached. My breath caught in my throat. The words looked small on the screen, but my life shifted under them. It was proof that someone on the other end believed me. When I walked into the kitchen, Earl was sipping coffee. He acted like nothing had happened. My mother asked me to keep good thoughts and not accuse anyone. Earl joked that soldiers these days could not drive in the rain. I put my phone in my pocket without looking at him. I no longer cared about his opinion. I cared about evidence and the people who knew how to use it. That afternoon, my unit went to the range for a brief familiarization. The air smelled like powder and brass. At the far end, I saw SSG Mercer checking a clipboard. He gave me a look that tried to be superior. I returned a calm stare. When I handled my assigned weapon, I inspected every surface. Nothing looked sloppy. The range tag still nagged at me. It was new, too new. I fired, cleared, and reloaded with clean motions. A misfeed happened once. The weapon hiccuped. I called ceasefire and stepped back. The range safety officer checked it. No violation, no breach of discipline. My hands stayed steady even though my heart raced. Someone wanted me to fail. I refused to give them that satisfaction. When training ended, I walked back to my car and called the garage for an update. They told me the wheel was safe now and I could pick it up soon. I thanked them. As I hung up, the sky above Fort Campbell cleared just a little. A faint stripe of blue edged past the clouds. I sat in the driver's seat of a borrowed car and stared at the windshield. I realized I no longer feared the silence of my house. Silence was where I built my case. That night, Earl tried to brag again, telling my mother that the mechanic probably exaggerated. He laughed like danger was a joke. I kept my voice even and said nothing. Inside, I held the case number from CID like a shield. The next morning, I printed every attachment and slid them into a binder. I used sheet protectors because details matter. The world might think Supply only hands out boxes, but Supply knows how to catalog truth. The night of the near accident had shaken me, but it also carved a line in stone. I felt fear, but fear carried clarity. Families should protect each other. Mine protected a lie, and now a federal agent wanted the evidence. That was twist 5 the moment the ground began to tilt under the people who thought I would always stay quiet. The house was dark when the clock hit 1 in the morning and rain tapped again on the gutters like it had done on the night the wheel tried to leave the car. I sat in my room with the door cracked just enough to hear the hallway. Earl believed every quiet person slept deeply and trusted the roof above them. He forgot that soldiers learn to sleep light. Before I lay down, I placed my phone on the nightstand, turned on white noise, and activated the recording app. A small hum filled the room, soft enough to hide the click of a door or the sound of a whisper. I closed my eyes not to rest, but to listen. The floor creaked. A faint glow spilled from the living room. I heard Earl's voice, low and smug. He was speaking into the same tiny speaker I had seen before, the one that sent his instructions to someone who should have known better. The words were not loud, but they carried weight. Change the BCG. Make her fail the range at 0500. She will not know until it jams. People like her do not belong in uniform. The phrase struck me again as sharp as the first time in the hook of this nightmare. He spoke like someone giving orders in a cheap movie, but the danger was real. A swapped bolt carrier group in a weapon can cause a malfunction. It could lead to a safety violation or an accident. He wanted me to fail not through skill or merit, but through sabotage. My stomach tightened as I heard him say, "It will look like she panicked. They will write her up." The thought of a safety violation burns deeper than an insult. In the Army, safety is sacred. It protects lives. Tampering with weapons is not a prank. It is a crime. The white noise kept the recording clean. I did not move. I did not breathe deeply. Earl whispered again, "Mercer will handle the cage. Range control will never know." The speaker clicked off. Footsteps moved down the hall. I kept my breathing even. My door stayed cracked. Light swept across the carpet, then vanished. When silence returned, I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. The worst part of betrayal is not the first blow. It is how familiar it starts to feel. I reached for my phone and saved the recording. I added it to the binder with the other proof. The house was quiet again, but I did not trust the walls around me. The next morning, I showered, tied my hair, and put on my uniform. I looked in the mirror and saw the same face as always, calm, steady. No sign of fear. Quiet Knife was not a nickname. It was a way of life. I drove to Post while the sky was still dark, headlights tracing the curves of the road. I parked near the range office and walked across gravel that crunched under my boots. A range safety officer named Alvarez stood under a canopy checking paperwork. He greeted me with a nod. I said I needed a pre-inspection of my assigned weapon before training began. He raised a brow but did not argue. In the military, clean requests backed by regulation carry their own authority. He unlocked the cage and rolled the rack forward. I lifted the weapon and released the bolt. I checked the carrier. I checked the pin. I checked the serial on the range tag. The tag still looked newer than it should. The BCG looked worn in places that did not match my prior inspections. Alvarez noticed my focus. He asked if something was wrong. I kept my voice level and told him I wanted to ensure everything was within regulation because a malfunction on the line could cause a safety halt. He respected the answer and signed the sheet confirming the pre-inspection. That was mini revenge, the kind that ruins a saboteur's script. If Mercer and Earl wanted me to jam on the line, the range safety officer now stood between them and their plan. At 0500, the sun barely touched the horizon. Soldiers formed up weapons, slung helmets secured. Mercer watched me expecting panic. Instead, he saw calm steps, careful loading, deliberate movements. When I fired, the weapon clicked once in a way that did not feel right. My training took over. Muzzle safe. Immediate action. Clear. Reload. Fire. No violation, no loss of control. The RSO saw everything. Mercer tried to approach and suggest I needed retraining. Alvarez looked him in the eye and said she followed the book. Nothing unsafe. I saw frustration tighten Mercer's jaw. He wanted a show. He wanted witnesses to my failure, but failure did not arrive. After the range, I walked back to the parking lot while soldiers chatted and joked. My heart pounded, but I hid it well. I opened my phone and sent the new recording to my secure email. Then I sent a brief message to Captain Price. Audio from 100 hours. Orders to tamper confirmed. Range safe. She responded with one line. CID is already listening. Bring what you have. The shock of those words hit harder than any insult. CID was not only aware of the tip, they were monitoring. They had seen the pattern in my evidence. The late badge swipes, the altered tag, the garage report, the recording from the living room. Betrayal makes you feel alone, but justice works quietly in the background. I got into my car and rested my hands on the steering wheel. The sky brightened over Fort Campbell, turning gray to pale gold. Soldiers were still packing gear, boots stomping gravel, a flag flapping in cold morning air. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight of fear shift off my shoulders and onto the men who created it. Earl called me before I left post. His voice sounded bright and fake. He wanted to know how range went. I told him everything was safe. Nothing more. He laughed, expecting me to explain or stumble. I did not. I hung up before his words could poison the day. On the drive home, I thought about how toxic families tell the world that they love you while loosening the bolts beneath your feet. They expect silence. They expect obedience. But quiet is not the same as weak. Quiet remembers. Quiet plans. Quiet collects proof. The recording from 0100 hours sat in my inbox like a blade carved from truth, and CID held the handle. The morning after the pre-inspection felt like walking into a storm I could not see, because even though the sun had barely climbed over the tree line, the air at the range was tight, with something unspoken. Soldiers lined up weapons, slung helmets buckled, and Mercer walked back and forth, holding a clipboard like a judge waiting to strike. I ignored him and focused on the barrel, the chamber, the weight in my hands. When training began, I felt the familiar rhythm of breathing, loading, firing, and clearing. But at 0500, a misfeed snapped through the metal with a sharp click. For a heartbeat, I felt something awful rise inside me. The flash of fear that maybe they had done it again, maybe the tampering went deeper. But training overrides panic. I kept the muzzle pointed downrange finger safely off the trigger and called ceasefire with a clear, steady voice. The range safety officer stepped in, checked the weapon, cleared the round, and nodded. Procedure followed. No violation. I saw Mercer watching, waiting for a mistake, waiting for me to flinch or argue or look unsure, because he needed doubt to grow. Instead, the RSO handed the weapon back and said, "Carry on." Mercer pursed his lips and marched to the clipboard. When training ended, he tried to press the issue anyway. He said a misfeed showed I was unprepared and needed retraining. He said the unit could not risk unsafe behavior. The RSO looked him straight in the eye and quoted Regulation AR 385-63, the one that outlines surface danger zones and safety procedures. He pointed out that I had followed every rule, every step, every safety protocol. He even wrote a note stating my actions prevented a possible mishap. That document felt like a stone in the foundation of truth. Mercer hated it. His eyes flicked toward me with cold frustration. He had expected chaos. He got discipline. After the range soldiers headed back toward the DFAC joking about chow and hot coffee, I sat at a small table by the corner, picking at scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard. My hands felt steady, but inside my chest something was sinking. Not fear anymore. Something heavier. I thought about my mother, about the way she told me not to make things a big deal, about the way she went silent when Earl lied in front of others, about the way she begged for peace at any price. I looked at the steam rising from my cup and wondered why she never stood beside me, why she let someone tear at my life and still called it family. Sitting alone in that cafeteria made me feel smaller than any insult. Soldiers walked by clattering trays, laughing, half awake. None of them knew that the person across from them was living with sabotage lies and a mother who refused to see the truth. Being alone in a crowded room hurts more than an empty house. I stared at the table and told myself that pain would not decide who I became. At lunch, I pulled out my phone and opened a form that only a few soldiers ever use, the anonymous safety reporting system. I attached the photo of the range tag, the notes from the inspection, and the date of the misfeed. I described what happened without naming Mercer or Earl. Facts do not need names to find the right target. When I hit send, the report disappeared into the system like a quiet arrow. That was mini revenge, not loud, not dramatic, but precise. If someone tried to argue later, the record would be there time-stamped and registered with brigade safety. When I finished chow, I stepped outside, felt the cold air on my cheeks, and realized that even if my own mother refused to stand with me, the Army had rules that protected truth. Regulation is the language that bullies cannot twist. Back at the company area, I gathered my binder and walked to the small bench behind the building. My phone buzzed. I expected another rumor or a message from a cousin pretending to care. Instead, the notification came from a CID address. Special Agent Donovan requesting immediate meeting. Bring evidence. JAG present. My breath caught. I read the message twice. This was not a suggestion. This was an order from justice itself. The twist hit hard. CID was not only opening a case, they had agents ready, and JAG would be at the table. The walls that Earl and Mercer built out of lies and swagger had started to crack. I walked to my car, feeling gravel press under my boots, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something more powerful than fear. I felt momentum. Betrayal pushed me into darkness, but truth built a path out. On the drive to the CID office, the world looked different. The trees lining the road stood still in the sunlight. The flag over the gate snapped against the wind. Soldiers walked with purpose. Nobody knew what I carried in my binder. Nobody knew that audio recordings and garage reports were sitting in sheet protectors like quiet weapons. When I parked and stepped out, the air smelled like clean winter coming early. I walked into the building, hands steady, heart pounding, and told the front desk agent I had a meeting with Special Agent Donovan. He led me down a hallway with white walls and framed certificates. Every step made the weight of the past few weeks lift. I was done begging anyone to believe me. I had proof. They had authority. The dark tunnel was not the end. It was just the place where light had not reached yet. And now, with CID waiting, light was on its way. The CID office smelled like coffee and paper and a kind of official patience. A receptionist with a calm voice handed me a visitor badge and a clipboard, and I sat across from a man who introduced himself as Special Agent Donovan. He had the steady face of someone who had coaxed truth out of people for a long time. I laid the binder on the metal table between us and slid each sheet into view. The audio from 80119 was first. I played it while he listened, head tilted, pen ready. Earl's whisper came through clean and raw. Change the BCG. Make her fail the range at 0500. Mercer will handle the cage. You could have heard a pin drop in the room when the recording ended. Donovan did not react theatrically. He made a small note and then pointed to the next file. The garage invoice lay there next to the mechanic's signature. The lug nuts had been turned just enough to be dangerous. A photo of the range tag sat beside it with a clear new sheen, the number on the tag different than the number in the armorer log. The short video from the cookout showed Earl speaking with a loud confidence, while my mother shifted her weight and refused to look up. Each piece was small on its own, but together they made a pattern, with the straightness of a rule. Donovan ran his finger along the pages, and then looked at me with a professionalism that felt like armor. He said we were going to move carefully and fast because every minute risked evidence degrading. The JAG office had already been contacted by Captain Naomi Price. I felt the warm weight of her card in my pocket, like a promise. When she arrived, she did not need a dramatic entrance. She folded her arms and read the binder with the eye of someone trained to see legal threads where others saw gossip. She advised immediate steps. We drafted a preservation letter for the unit addressed to the arms room and range control. We requested that CCTV footage from the arms room and the range be preserved, and that badge logs and range sign and sheets be locked from alteration. Captain Price explained subpoenas and civilian vendors, and the difference between an internal memo and a criminal referral. She said the vendor who supplied cages and tags would have to preserve text threads and invoices under subpoena because they were a civilian conduit in the plan. That explanation felt like a tool being handed to me. It turned the vague ache of betrayal into something with edges. It allowed me to point. The moment I said no out loud was not dramatic. It was the sound of a sentence finishing. I told Donovan and Captain Price that I wanted charges investigated and that I wanted protection. I said that I would not tolerate my life being used as a way to make someone look important. The words felt steady in my mouth. The legal team moved with a quiet efficiency. The preservation letter went out by official channel that afternoon. Someone from range control followed up to confirm that CCTV archives were locked and that badge logs were placed under administrative hold. The arms room received the instruction and acknowledged receipt. That was victory in paperwork, but it was a hinge, a small metal thing that made the next moment possible. I left the CID office with a folder of copies and a schedule for an interview. I drove across post and thought about all the small ways I had been told to shrink. The car ride felt like a crossing out of old handwriting. Back at the house, I opened my bank app and began to sever the invisible strings that had tied my family to old spending patterns and to Earl's imagined benevolence. I canceled auto pays that had been set to pay the electric bill, the internet, and a storage unit that housed old holiday boxes. I converted accounts so my mother received statements directly in her name, with my oversight planned only through documented correspondence. Then I drafted an email to her. I kept it short, clear, and without rancor. I explained that from now on all household payments would be transparent, and that I would send copies of my receipts to her email each month. I attached the bank statement showing the mixer purchase and the refund receipt I had placed in the kitchen drawer. I wrote that I did this to protect her credit and to stop confusion about who paid for what. I closed with a line that hurt to send but needed saying. I said I loved her and that I would not let anyone endanger her or me in the name of family. I hit send and felt the small rush of autonomy. That was Mini Revenge 8. It was not a headline. It was a change in bookkeeping and access and dignity. The next day, a CID analyst called and said they had analyzed the badge logs and found an anomaly. Mercer had accessed the arms room outside of his scheduled duty time. Not only that the vendor text chain included a message with Earl CET, the name on the vendor log matched the number on the screenshot I had captured in the gas station reflection days earlier. The twist landed with a clean certainty. It tied a circle around the evidence and put it in a frame that could not be shrugged off as coincidence or a bad joke. Donovan said he would request interviews with Mercer and with the vendor, and that the chain would extend into the unit and into civilian accounts. He said that when civilian contractors are looped into military operations in improper ways, the legal net tightens, because multiple jurisdictions and accountability rules come into play. Captain Price advised caution. She reminded me that internal administrative remedies and criminal investigations moved on different tracks, and that both would need careful navigation. She also said that the brigade safety office would take administrative action, but that her job was to ensure the legal process respected service due process while protecting the victim. I listened and felt my fear and anger calibrate into purpose. Later that night, Earl called. His voice was casual when he asked how the range turned out. I told him the truth. It was safe. He was silent for a beat and then laughed the way people laugh when they think they have the upper hand. I did not feed the laugh. I told him the arms room had been placed on an administrative hold. I told him the preservation letter existed. I told him CID had a case number. His laugh stopped, and his voice tightened. He began to ask for clarification and then plead for family confidentiality. I read him back the part of my email to my mother about transparency and protection. I said I wanted him to understand that the choice was not about punishment, but about safety and proof. He tried to bargain. He tried to blame stress at work and a misunderstanding of military terms. His words came out thin and panicked. The conversation ended with him saying he wanted to cooperate and that he loved my mother. I set the phone down and felt a weight shift. The legal system had started to move. Truth had a cadence and steps. It required patience and paper and the presence of people trained to hold chaos accountable. In the days that followed, investigators interviewed the mechanic, the vendor representative, and Mercer. I sat in a room while Captain Price outlined the legal steps and told me what to expect. She said that badge logs and CCTV would be the deciding pieces, and that the fact Earl appeared on the vendor thread would show intent if paired with the altered tag and the garage evidence. It was not certain yet. Nothing is certain until a judge says so. But the tilt of the world had changed. Where once I had been alone at the table while everyone laughed, now the table included agents, lawyers, and documents that spoke for me. My simple no had become a legal no, a packet of evidence and a refusal to be erased. I slept that night with the binder on the bedside table and the feeling that the word no had teeth. The first interviews happened inside a quiet conference room on post, where a recorder sat at the center of the table and everyone spoke in slow, clipped sentences because every word was being documented. Mercer came in first. He tried to fill the room with confidence, but his voice shook when agents asked why his badge appeared in the arms room outside his duty schedule. He said he must have forgotten to sign out. He said the system had glitches. He said someone else could have used his badge. CID read the log back to him, time-stamped and verified by the door camera. The silence after that was long enough for everyone to hear how his story collapsed. Later, the armorer came in. His hands trembled when they asked about the altered tag and a new inventory entry that had no matching signature. He spoke fast, apologizing to no one in particular, saying he thought someone higher up wanted the tag switched and that he had not known what was happening. He kept repeating that he did not want to lose his position. The vendor representative arrived after lunch, shifting in his seat, like he had been sent into a place far above his pay grade. When agents asked about the texts, he said he felt pressured to help because Earl had talked like he was part of the command structure. He said he just wanted to keep the contract. He mentioned phone calls and messages and invoices that now felt poisoned. The interviews did not end with shouting. They ended with everyone realizing that the net was real and that no one would carry their lies home without consequence. When CID called my mother, they asked her to come in and listen to the audio. She arrived in a plain sweater, hair pulled back, looking like she hoped the whole thing was just a misunderstanding. The agents pressed play, and Earl's whisper poured out of the small speaker. "Change the BCG. Make her fail. Mercer will handle the cage." My mother covered her mouth and stared at the table. She kept shaking her head like she could push the sound away. When the clip ended, she whispered that it could not be true. Then she folded in on herself and began to cry. It was the first time I saw her believe me without excuses or soft focus stories about family loyalty. After that day, she called me with a small voice and asked if we could have dinner together in Clarksville because she wanted to talk without Earl listening. I chose a quiet place downtown, a little restaurant where the lights hung low and the booths gave us privacy. I arrived early and laid out printed statements across a simple manila folder. When she walked in, she sat across from me and stared at the table like she feared what she would see. I opened the folder and showed her a map of the payments I had made for years. Rent when she was between jobs, the power bill in her name, the internet that she thought Earl paid for, the mixer he bragged about buying, the holidays where I swiped my card and he posed like the hero. Each statement was a soft cut deeper than shouting. I was not trying to humiliate her. I was trying to show her the shape of the truth so she could stand in it. She cried again and asked why I never told her. I said I had tried, and every time she told me I was being dramatic or disrespectful to Earl. She reached for my hand and said she was sorry. I believed her. It was an apology without excuses, and it landed in a part of me that had been empty for a long time. While we sat there, the world outside kept moving, cars passing on Riverside Drive and soldiers heading to late shifts, but I felt like something heavy had finally been set down. 2 days later, Captain Price called to say that a Gomor was being drafted for Mercer. A general officer memorandum of reprimand is not a slap on the wrist. It is a public mark on a record that can freeze a career in place. Mercer learned that the paperwork was real when his supervisor called him in and told him his name had been elevated to the brigade commander. The air in that building must have gone thin. At the same time, a barment letter was prepared for Earl. Barment means you are banned from entering the installation. It is an official declaration that your presence is a threat to order and safety. Earl did not know it yet, but the gate he had walked through 100 times would not open for him much longer. The walls around him were shrinking, and he had no idea where to run. I imagined him at home pacing, telling himself that everything would blow over because family would not let something like this get out of hand. But it was out of his hands now. The system he thought he could toy with had teeth and a long memory. I spent those days moving quietly, going to formation, doing my job and waiting. Some of the soldiers in my unit began looking at me differently. They whispered that something big was happening and that someone had crossed the wrong person. A few sergeants offered nods of respect that had never been given before. They had heard pieces of the story, and they understood that no one puts a finger on safety rules without paying for it. One afternoon, Mercer passed me in the hallway outside battalion. His shoulders were hunched, and his face was gray. He did not look at me. He just kept walking, swallowed by the long corridor. I did not smile. I did not feel triumph. I felt the steady rhythm of consequence. The brake run had begun. The lies that once looked like a fortress had started to crack, and through those cracks, everyone could see the simple truth. I did not shout. I documented. I chose quiet justice over chaos. The Wilson Theater smelled like old curtains and polished floors, and the faint trace of coffee that always shows up when soldiers gather early on a Saturday. It was November, and the air outside had turned sharp. The kind of Tennessee cold that stings your ears before you get inside. Families filled the rows with kids swinging their legs and spouses whispering about Thanksgiving plans. No one knew what was about to happen. The brigade town hall was usually boring a string of safety reminders and volunteer announcements, but that morning every senior leader was present. Soldiers in pressed uniforms lined the walls, and I could feel an undercurrent in the room, a quiet tension that did not match the casual laughter of the families. My mother sat near the back holding her purse like a shield. She kept looking toward the door even though she knew Earl was not allowed on post anymore. When the brigade commander walked up to the microphone, the murmur faded. He thanked everyone for coming and said this town hall was different because it was about integrity and safety. He said those two words slowly so no one missed them. Then he talked about how small actions can threaten lives and how rules exist to protect every soldier who steps onto a range or signs out a weapon. Every sentence felt like a pin pushed deeper into a map that only a few of us could see. Then he introduced a representative from the legal section. Captain Price stepped forward in her Class A uniform and opened a red folder. She explained that what she was about to read was not classified and not rumor. It was a summary of findings related to an incident on the range involving tampering and an attempt to create a safety violation. She read without drama. The cadence of her voice made the facts heavier than shouting ever could. She spoke about altered equipment and a coordinated attempt to force a failure during a live fire qualification. She referenced audio evidence of a civilian conspiring with a soldier. She stated that the soldier involved had been removed from duty pending formal action and that a civilian participant was now barred from the installation. She finished with a clear line. There was no finding of negligence or wrongdoing by Specialist Mara Bennett. Instead, the investigation confirmed that she followed every safety protocol and prevented potential danger during the incident. For a moment, the room was silent. Then the brigade commander stepped back to the microphone. He called out my rank and name and asked me to stand. I rose slowly, boots planted in the aisle, heart beating hard against my ribs. Then he said the words that froze the entire theater, "Quiet knife front and center." The nickname had traveled through the unit for months, whispered more than spoken. Hearing it echo across that theater felt like a door slamming shut on every lie that had ever been told about me. I walked to the stage while families turned to look. Some soldiers nodded with respect. Others stared like they were seeing me for the first time. When I reached the front, the commander shook my hand in front of everyone. He thanked me for protecting my fellow soldiers and for standing firm when someone tried to erase me. The room erupted in applause. Not polite clapping, real applause that swelled from every corner of the theater. My mother covered her mouth and cried quietly. A few rows ahead, I saw relatives who had once laughed at Earl's jokes. They stared at the floor now. They did not clap. They did not look at me. They had believed the wrong story, and the truth had caught them in front of everyone. After the meeting, people lined up to speak to me. A sergeant from another battalion said he had heard rumors, but seeing the investigation made him respect the way I handled it. A young private whispered that if I ever needed help in the motor pool, I should call her. Even officers who rarely noticed junior enlisted soldiers treated me with the kind of formality that comes from understanding someone faced danger and stayed steady. Later outside in the bright, cold sunlight, my mother hugged me and said she was proud. It was the first time she had said those words without prompting or condition. The gate guard stood straighter as families left the installation. Soldiers carried sleeping toddlers to cars and laughed about where to eat lunch. Everything looked normal except for the invisible shift under it. Some people did not show up to congratulate anyone. Earl was one of them. He had been barred, and the letter saying so was probably already sitting in his mailbox. After the crowd thinned, I drove home and parked in the driveway where Earl used to stand bragging about equipment he never touched. I went to the garage and took out the spare key he always pretended belonged to him. It never did. I had paid the storage fees and the electric bill that kept the opener working. I placed the key in an envelope and left it on the shelf where he used to dump his boots. Then I changed the access code. It took less than a minute and erased a privilege he never earned. Inside the house, I opened the cabinet where the storage unit contract sat and removed his name from the account. That was Mini Revenge 10. Quiet, precise. Not cruel. Simply accurate. I did not scream. I did not explain. I just reclaimed the things he thought he owned. Word traveled fast through families like mine. I knew cousins and uncles would talk about the theater and the applause and the nickname. Some would say nothing because silence is easier than accountability. Others would replay every time they ignored my voice at the dinner table. But it did not matter. The truth had been said in a microphone and recorded in official minutes. No one could twist it into gossip again. That night, I sat in my room with my uniform hung neatly for Monday and my boots polished. I replayed the moment on stage, the applause, the nickname, the exact second when I realized I was done shrinking. I did not win by shouting. I won by documenting and by trusting the system to catch what I could not hold myself. I thought about my younger self sitting at the back of family gatherings while people laughed. I wished I could tell her she would stand in a theater one day and hear her name called with respect. I wished I could tell her that quiet does not mean weak. It means choosing when to speak and letting evidence speak louder than pride. If you want the trial phase and you believe in silent revenge and standing up for yourself, comment trial. Fallout arrived without fanfare. It moved on paper first, then across desks, then into living rooms where silence replaced certainty. The Monday after the Wilson Theater Town Hall, Mercer was called into the battalion headquarters. Soldiers said they saw him walking in with shoulders squared and walking out with his eyes fixed on the ground. The go-more had come down from the general. A general officer memorandum of reprimand is a career weight few can lift. It slid into his permanent file and locked itself there. The reassignment orders followed that afternoon, sending him to a low-visibility administrative role where no badges, no weapons, and no qualification oversight passed through his hands. His next promotion window closed before he had a chance to defend it. 12 to 18 months of stalled career is a lifetime in the Army, long enough for younger soldiers to pass you, long enough for everyone to know why. The counseling memo required him to complete safety retraining and to sign acknowledgement that he had violated trust. Those signatures cut deeper than a shouted punishment ever could. The armorer received his own packet. It was not as severe because he had not orchestrated the plan, but he was no longer allowed to work near weapon cages. He got an official warning, a retraining assignment, and a full review of standard operating procedures. When he walked past the parking lot later that day, he avoided every eye that turned toward him. Soldiers have a sharp sense for who takes shortcuts around safety. That stigma is heavy. At home, the consequences stretched into the civilian world. Earl opened his mail and found the Barment letter. The paper said in plain language that he was barred from all Army installations. He could not drive through the gate to attend Family Day, could not volunteer at any event on post, could not visit the housing office or the chapel. He liked being seen as part of the military world. Now even the guards at the gate would turn him around. It was a kind of exile that looked invisible from the outside but cut deep on the inside. The legal file moved next. A packet from CID with the evidence of tampering and endangerment was forwarded to the district attorney in Montgomery County, Tennessee. I learned that criminal cases do not rush. They crawl with precision, verifying dates, texts, invoices, logs, and interviews. But the referral meant something permanent had begun. No one could sweep it under a rug or call it a misunderstanding between family members. It was now a legal record. My mother called the night Earl got his Barment letter. She sounded smaller than I remembered. She said she was sorry again. She said she had spent years believing the version of me that Earl described because it was easier than asking why his stories never matched my actions. She cried quietly and said she wanted to repair whatever was left. I listened and kept my voice calm. I told her she did not have to pick sides. She only had to accept reality. I also told her that I needed one boundary to stay firm. There would be no contact with Earl, not texts, not late-night calls, not surprise visits. All communication about anything in the household would go through email, so nothing could be twisted or erased. She agreed. She said she understood that supporting me did not mean hating him, but that protecting me meant she could not hide what he had done. She asked if I would still help her with the bills until she got back on her feet. I said yes. Support was never the problem. Secrets were. I went through the account and put her name at the top so she could access it independently, then changed passwords so Earl could no longer dip into anything I paid for. When I finished, I sat back and realized how quiet the house felt without his voice filling every room. The twist came 2 weeks after the town hall. The brigade command sergeant major visited our company during a routine walk-through. He stopped in front of me, asked how long I had been in, and nodded when I told him. Then he asked if I planned to go before the promotion board in the first quarter of 2026. The question was not casual. It was a recommendation disguised as curiosity. Soldiers around us pretended not to listen, but I saw every ear tilt. He said the board needed people who understood responsibility and who could stay calm while others panicked. He said those traits mattered more than perfect fitness scores or loud voices. He told me to make sure my packet was ready. When he walked away, the platoon sergeant leaned in and said that not many junior enlisted get that kind of nudge. It was a quiet recognition, but it hit with the force of years of swallowed pride. Promotion is more than stripes. It is being trusted to carry the weight of other people's mistakes without breaking rules to get ahead. That night, I stood in my room and looked at my uniform hanging by the closet. I thought about the day I joined the Army, how Earl had laughed and said logistics was just handing out boxes. I thought about every time he said I was just playing soldier. Then I thought about the Wilson Theater and the applause and the words, "quiet knife" front and center. I realized that the fallout had done more than punish them. It had cleared a path for me. I did not need Earl to approve. I did not need my family to tell stories about me. The Army had spoken in documents and signatures, and a sergeant major's quiet question. In the days that followed, I started building my promotion packet. Awards, volunteer work certificates, college credits, safety reports, and my NCO evaluation all went into a binder. As I slipped each page into a sleeve, I felt something inside me settle. Every sheet was a reminder that my story had never been the one Earl told. The real story had been written in timestamps and discipline and in the fact that I was still standing. I carried the binder to my car and placed it in the passenger seat with a steady hand. The fallout had finished one chapter. The next one was mine to build. The audacity return came in the form of an envelope with my name typed in stiff block letters. It arrived 3 weeks after the Barment letter, and the handwriting on the back was Earl's tight and angry, like someone trying to draw blood with a pen. I opened it at the kitchen table, while my mother watched from the doorway. She pretended to check the mail pile, but her eyes stayed fixed on the paper in my hands. The letter was dressed up in apology language, but beneath every sentence was a demand. He said he wanted the Barment lifted. He said a misunderstanding should not destroy a family. He said the Army took things too far. He wrote that if I would sign a simple agreement not to pursue further action, he would forgive me. That was the first time I laughed in weeks. Forgive me. My mother stepped closer and asked what the letter said. I handed it to her without commenting. She read it, face tightening with every line, and then set it down like it was something infected. She asked what I planned to do. I told her I would let the system answer. I forwarded the letter to JAG and to the civilian attorney handling the case referral. Captain Price called later that day and said that if Earl wanted a settlement, the terms would not be dictated by him. She advised that we could set conditions, but they would be realistic and grounded in safety and restitution, not in family pride. She asked what I wanted, and for the first time I answered without hesitation. I told her I wanted a no-contact order for 12 months because chaos always returns, when ego is not contained. I wanted completion of anger management classes and community service, because behavior does not change, because someone promises it will. I wanted restitution for the damage to my vehicle and repayment for the bills I had been covering for years. And I wanted written confirmation that he would not interfere in any internal Army investigation or administrative action. Captain Price said those were reasonable boundaries. She drafted a reply. When the letter left her office, it carried the weight of legal tone. It said that Earl could accept the conditions, or the case would continue through civilian channels. It reminded him that the Army had already taken administrative action and that the criminal referral was now in the hands of the district attorney. It said nothing about forgiveness. The next day, Earl responded by email and the tone snapped. He said I had exaggerated everything. He said I was destroying the family name. He said the Army had brainwashed me. He said my mother had turned against him. He threw blame like gravel, trying to make any piece stick. My attorney told me not to respond, so I didn't. Silence is sometimes the strongest sentence. A week later, the next twist arrived. The district attorney's office sent notice of an arraignment date. The charges listed tampering and reckless endangerment. Nothing was guaranteed, but it was enough to drag the truth into a courtroom where lies cannot stretch their legs. JAG confirmed that there would be a victim impact statement if the case moved forward. The words victim impact felt strange, heavy, and exact. My mother cried when she heard. She said she never imagined Earl's actions could lead to a courtroom. I told her that actions have destinations. Some end in applause, some end in silence, some end in a judge's voice. That week, I performed one more small act of revenge, not loud, not dramatic, just precise. The storage unit on the edge of town had always been in my name. Earl treated it like his personal extension. Boxes of his tools, old furniture, and random equipment filled half the space. He loved telling people he paid for it. In reality, the card on file was mine. I drove there on a Thursday evening, walked through the rows of metal doors, and waited at the counter while the attendant pulled up the account. I asked to remove Earl's name as an authorized user. The attendant clicked a few keys and printed a form. I signed, dated, and initialed the line that said any late fees or defaults would go to him, not me. The employee nodded and said the update was immediate. It was a small thing, a signature and a stamp, but it cut off another place where Earl had built imaginary authority. I walked back to my car with the revised contract in a folder. That was Mini Revenge 11, a line of ink, a shift in ownership. No drama required. My mother called the next day and said Earl had tried to access the storage unit and been told his name no longer worked. She said he yelled at the attendant, then stormed out. She sounded ashamed, but not because of me. She sounded ashamed because she had spent so long defending someone who had nothing to stand on. Over the next few days, Earl sent a flurry of messages to her, blaming me and claiming that the army was out to ruin him. She did not reply. She forwarded every message to the attorney. She told me she was done changing the subject at family dinners, done hiding behind excuses, and done pretending that silence was loyalty. I saw strength return to her one sentence at a time. The day the arraignment notice arrived in his mailbox, Earl sent one last letter addressed to me and my mother. He wrote that he had been pushed too far and that he would not go to court because he had done nothing wrong. He wrote that we should all remember where we came from. I read the letter once and set it aside. My mother tore hers in half and threw it away. After that, there was only quiet. No messages. No phones ringing at midnight. No footsteps pacing the hallway. Just quiet. That silence was the best apology he would never say out loud. The system had picked up the weight and carried it forward. With the arraignment scheduled and the no-contact boundary in place, I felt a strange peace settle over the house. I had not shouted. I had not begged. I had not tried to convince anyone of my worth. I had simply shown the truth and let it stand. That night, I slept without the binder next to the bed. It did not need guarding anymore. The truth was moving on its own. December came quietly, without drama, without shouting, without midnight footsteps in the hallway. It was the first Christmas season in years where the air inside our house did not feel like thin glass. I went with my mother to the Clarksville Christmas market on a mild Saturday night. Strings of warm lights hung above the booths, and carolers sang at the entrance near the hot chocolate stand. My mother walked close beside me, hands tucked into her coat, and she did not look over her shoulder once. For years, she used to search the crowd for Earl even when he was not there. That night, she moved forward without hesitation. She stopped at a stand selling knitted scarves, touched the yarn gently, and said she had forgotten how quiet life could feel when people are not forced to walk on eggshells. We sat on a bench near the food trucks and shared a cinnamon pastry. She apologized again, not with grand speeches, but with a soft voice that sounded like the truth finally found a place to sit. She said she had told her sister the full story. She said she would start counseling after the holidays because silent survival had become her habit, and habits do not break themselves. I told her I would go with her to the first appointment. Her shoulders relaxed like a weight she had carried for decades, suddenly loosened. When we stood to leave, she slipped her arm through mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt like something rebuilding brick by brick, word by word, boundary by boundary. A week later, I was called to the brigade headquarters. I walked past the portraits on the wall, expecting a standard briefing or a routine administrative meeting. Instead, the sergeant major and the brigade commander were waiting. The commander began by talking about integrity and safety, about people who do the right thing when nobody is watching, and then he turned to me. He presented a challenge coin and said he had read the summary of the case and the statements that were being prepared. He said the Army needed soldiers who protect the standard, not just perform it. The words landed deeper than I expected, because for so long, my family had treated my service like a costume. The coin felt heavier than metal. It felt like respect. The following Monday, my company commander handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation for the promotion board. She wrote that I had demonstrated calm under pressure responsibility beyond my rank and quiet leadership that influenced the entire formation. I read the letter twice, letting every sentence erase one more echo of Earl's insults. That night, I placed the letter in the binder that used to hold evidence. The divider tabs were still there. The audio transcript, the garage report, the badge, logs, the CID referral. That binder had been my shield when nobody believed me. Now it was just a record of the truth. I closed it slowly and set it on the top shelf. I did not destroy it. I did not need to. The truth was not fragile anymore. In January, the arraignment moved forward. I was not required to testify yet, but JAG said I would give a victim impact statement if needed. The word victim no longer made my stomach twist. It made sense. Victim is not a synonym for weak. Victim is a synonym for witness. My mother said she would attend the hearing. She said she would not look away again. A few days before Christmas, I drove out to a quiet park on the edge of Clarksville. There was a wooden overlook above the river where soldiers sometimes eat lunch or sit before night shifts. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and listened to the water moving under the bridge. For a long time, I thought justice meant screaming until someone listened. Now I knew justice could be quiet. Justice could be paperwork. Justice could be evidence and procedure and calm voices in official rooms. Justice could be a soldier standing still while the world finally saw what she had carried. I thought about the night in September when Earl whispered orders into a speaker, thinking the darkness would hide him. I thought about the range, the misfeed, the way my hands stayed steady. I thought about the binder and the audio and the moment CID said I had done the right thing. And then a sentence formed in my mind, simple and final. I did not shout. I documented. I chose quiet justice over chaos. That sentence was not for him. It was for me. Christmas morning arrived with cold air and a pale sky. My mother made coffee and put out 2 mugs instead of 3. There was no shouting, no apology, demanded no footsteps stomping through the hallway. We ate breakfast in peace. Later that afternoon, we baked cookies and dropped a box at the unit headquarters for soldiers pulling duty. When we returned home, my mother stood in the living room and looked at the quiet space that used to feel like a battlefield. She said the house finally sounded honest. In the evening, she asked if I was scared of the trial. I told her that fear does not win when someone finally stops hiding. She nodded with a look I had never seen before. It was not regret. It was resolve. The truth had taken root. Healing came in small steps. Every time my mother spoke without lowering her voice. Every time she refused to make excuses for him. Every time she reminded herself that love does not require erasing the truth. Toxic family does not vanish in a day, but boundaries are louder than fear when they are written down, signed, and enforced. Sometimes justice is a courtroom. Sometimes justice is a locked gate at the base entrance. Sometimes justice is a woman walking at a Christmas market with her head high. I stood at the window later that night and looked at the lights strung across the neighborhood. I thought about everything that happened and everything that would still unfold. I was not the girl who let people talk over her anymore. I was not the paper soldier Earl called me. I was the quiet knife, calm, precise, sharp when necessary, and I survived. If you believe in quiet justice and silent revenge, tell me where you are watching from. This is about emotional resilience, dignity over money, truth and closure, standing up for yourself, reclaiming respect. Let this be your lesson in betrayal and justice, without hate and revenge through truth. Comment. Quiet Knife, and subscribe.